I would like to welcome everyone to tonight's first interview in our series, The State of the Union, regarding the parliamentary elections, the upcoming ones in June for the European Union, the EU. We are very, very honored to have Wolfgang Streeck with us this evening. Before we get started, I just wanted to announce a couple of things. The next interview is on the 6th of May, with Kostas Lapavitsas, but at 6 p.m. CET, not like tonight at 7. And then on the 16th, we have Tara McCormick, who will join us at 7 p.m. CET. Kostas will be speaking about the state of the European economy, and Tara will be talking about the militarization of the EU. So a really brief introduction for Wolfgang. Many know who he is. Wolfgang Streeck is a sociologist and emeritus director of the prestigious Max Planck Institute for the Study of Societies. He is considered one of the leading progressive thinkers in Europe, especially with regard to the EU. He is well and truly one of the best authorities around. So we really would like to thank you for joining us, Wolfgang, and we'll just get started.
Thank you. Yeah.
Before we start looking at how the EU got here and where it's going, I would just like you to do a sort of short summary about where the EU is at this moment.
The European Union is something like a chameleon, and you can look at it from different perspectives, and you see different things. I like to describe it as a collection of failed projects accumulated over many years, like beginning of the 1970s, when you can really talk about attempts at building something like a supranational state in Europe, attempts that always failed, beginning with the so-called social dimension, which was conceived essentially as a response to the worker uprisings of the late 1960s in order to preserve some sort of social partnership at the European level, when it was breaking down at the national level. And then come all sorts of things like the integration of Eastern Europe, which remained incomplete and is beset with enormous problems. The internal market in the 1990s, which is not yet complete, because there are sectors in the economy that this neoliberal project could not incorporate. Then comes the monetary union, without political union and without fiscal union, being incomplete wherever you look at it, resulting in the fact that the promise of economic convergence inside Europe was not only not fulfilled, but the opposite took place, and so on and so on. So you can say that for different political purposes, by different political actors over time, different so-called integration projects were invented, and then they were left half completed, and now they are sort of a very difficult structure to understand. Think about the effective constitution of the European Union, which is a set of 2 treaties that you can read only if you have spent your life studying European law. There's no way anyone can understand and in addition, what the so-called acquis communautaire is. This thousands and thousands of pages of documents that new countries have to learn to recite by heart in order to be admitted to the European Union. So I'm saying this in order to make clear how very complicated this thing is, and that is essentially improvised from step to. You have to include that it began with 6 countries in the 1950s that were still deeply wounded by the war. 6 countries administering 2 sectors of their economy, steel and coal, together. That was it. And then now it is 27 countries, and in any social analysis, the size of a social structure is very important for what it can do and what it cannot do. Became enormously heterogeneous inside compared to the initial time, and served different functions. As I said, preserving the post-war settlement between capital and labor, that was the beginning, and then 180 degrees around in the 1990s, driving the neoliberal advance in the form of the internal market and then the monetary union, and all of these things were sort of remained shaky and difficult, and all of this is sort of incorporated in Frau von der Leyen as the main representative of this strange structure.
All right, then let's start with actually the most common phrase used by the EU, which is ever closer union. What has become of that?
Yeah, you see, the peoples have their histories and their experiences, and they differ from people to people and from country to country. The idea that you can homogenize the experiences of Europeans before the war, during the war, and after the war, and turn it into something like an ever closer union. Although I must say, this phrase is very wise in one place, where it speaks of the peoples of Europe, not of the people of Europe. It doesn't say an ever closer union of the people of Europe. No, the peoples. There is a plural here, and it recognizes the plurality. In a way, it is a sort of unbelievable ambition of this structure in Brussels to be able to govern simultaneously and under the same rules a country like, let's say, Denmark and Bulgaria, or a country, a deeply Catholic traditional country like Poland, and a country like France, which is almost the opposite in many ways. And heterogeneity. I mean, the European Union is a promise on paper that this heterogeneity can be overcome under a common government and for shared purposes. And you see that this not only is not the case, but as the world develops, the tensions between the member states of the European Union become much more visible. Maybe the important example, or the most important example, is this idea of the European Union being governed by a tandem of 2 states, 2 powerful member states, France and Germany. and throughout the history of the European Union, there was always this promise that at some time these two would act like one, and they would be the leading power of the European. Nothing at all is the case. There are very deep differences in interests, experiences, capacities between these two countries and states, which have always resulted in the Germans being sort of sometimes pulled in the direction of Paris. And when they came closer, they noticed that they would not be the leading party in this. And then they moved to, if they had to give in to someone else, they would rather give in to Washington. And imagine this difference between, I mean, when we talk about national security, between Germany with roughly 40,000 American troops on its soil, not a nuclear power. In fact, however, with a lot of nuclear warheads on its soil, which, however, are not under German control but under American control. And then take France, which imagines the world as at least tripartite structure between America, the East, Russia, China, and France, and France sort of representing the Europe and the European spirit, including Germany, where France delivers the diplomatic expertise and the nuclear bomb, and the Germans deliver the money to pay for it, and that has never really worked. Everything that came out of it was symbolisms. Symbolic things like every 5 years we sign a common treaty at Aachen, which is called Aachen III or Aachen II, and Aachen was the capital of Charlemagne, if you know, and then lots of things, lots of festivities are being started, but I tell you, the idea that these two could govern a united Europe together with the same perspective and same interest is a sort of illusion. Yeah, it doesn't exist.
Well, you recently wrote something which puzzled me. I mean, it may be just not important, but still, could you maybe elaborate on it? You wrote that the return of the king to the EU, the United States.
Yeah.
What did you mean by that?
Yeah, under Trump, there was this question whether the United States would still be willing to be the protective power. The medieval king delivered protection in exchange for obedience. No. And there was sort of, especially in Germany, a fear that the United States would turn their back to Europe, meaning Germany. And in fact, Trump had threatened to station, I think, 5,000 American troops, moving them out of Germany and taking them to Poland and all of these things. And then came Biden, and the Atlanticists in Germany were sort of reassured that they would always be under the protection of the United States. And then it turned out that the United States abandoned Afghanistan without even telling the Germans a day before they left. And then came the war. Someone blew up these pipelines, and the American president announced that what a great news that the Germans no longer can buy Russian gas, and now they buy American gas. So yes, the return of the king. The king wants taxes. The king doesn't deliver protection for nothing.
Right. Michael Hudson once said something which I find very thought-provoking, which was, he said, the United States didn't start the war in Ukraine only for the just to attack Russia, but they also did it to break the predominance of Germany over Europe, over the EU. How do you see that?
Yeah, with a certain qualification. It's a simplification as much as what you say today about Europe, and this is because Europe is such a complex structure that many things are true that are on the surface not necessarily compatible with each other. But in the end, national policies are made by coalitions of different groups, so that a nation doesn't have just one objective, but they have several objectives at the same time. And the trick for the national government is to bundle these so that different interest groups domestically see themselves represented in the national interest and the national goal. And in this respect, of course, the United States were always suspicious of Germany in particular as an economic power. This goes back to the 1980s, when there was this panic in the United States that Japan and Germany, the two countries that were thoroughly defeated in the Second World War, would now outcompete the United States in the world of the economy. And then the Japanese were told to adjust their exchange rate so as to not to be too victorious in the American market, and the United States tried to exchange sort of China for Japan, because they thought China would be easier to manage. And as far as Germany is concerned, after unification, everybody believed that the Germans sort of were economically going to be a basket case for a long time, and in some ways they were. Then happened this strange historical accident, namely that the attempt, especially by France, to use the European Union in order to end the predominance of the German economy over Europe, and especially the monetary union. Then it turned out that the real winner in the monetary union was Germany, not France, because as an export-oriented economy, sharing their currency with weaker countries meant that they had a more favorable exchange rate than they would have had if they were just on their own. And this sort of begins the dysfunctions inside the monetary union and the European Union. Then, so after the 2010s, or even earlier, after the 2000s, Germany began to become really economically powerful, and the United States became concerned about this, especially about a Europe governed by or organized by Germany. See, the Americans, but even more so the British, were always concerned about European integration in the following sense: who was to be the unifier of Europe? And for both of them, the problem always was, going back to the early 20th century, whether they could allow Germany to be the dominant country in Europe, unifying Europe as a continent under German leadership, which was essentially what not just the Nazis wanted, but also the collaborators in quite a few other countries. National Socialism was an international movement, not just a German one. There were fascists all over the place, and that thing failed in 1945. But after unification, the specter sort of rose again, with European Monetary Union being a place where Germany was the dominant power. What to do? The British decided that after they had not been able to prevent monetary union from happening, sort of to withdraw from it and to try from the outside to prevent a sort of, I mean, in a sense, to be the external obstacle to internal integration. All of these are long stories, go back to the 19th century. In short, I would say yes. There was a point when, especially when the United States saw that German export industries prospered because they bought energy from Russia, with the result that Russia also prospered. That was the problem. Not just Germany, but if you look at the economic figures, the 1990s under Yeltsin were a time in which Russia really was a basket case. I mean, in every possible respect. And that was when it was very close to the United States, because Yeltsin was essentially did what the US were telling him. Then when 1999 turned into 2000, Yeltsin simply disappeared and appointed this guy Putin as its president. And Putin from then on benefited from the fact that he was able to slowly sort of nurture the Russian economy in a more growth-oriented perspective as a result of selling energy to Western Europe, and in particular to Germany. Ukraine was sort of in between, and sometimes the Ukrainians or the Ukrainian big oligarchs who owned the pipelines that went through Ukraine from Russia to Germany, tried to interrupt the flow for whatever reason, to charge higher fees for it. And then already at this time, Ukraine became a point where you could sort of interrupt the beneficial economic relationships between Western Europe, Germany in particular, and Russia, and that was a great temptation.
Good. Well, we're at the geopolitical question. Let's talk about today. Now that the EU has become extremely involved, to put it mildly, in the Ukraine war, and is supporting Israel's genocide in Palestine. This is a completely new dimension of the EU.
It is.
Why and where is it leading to?
Yeah, let me put it. Let me first say, add a little qualification to this. It is not the European Union that supports Israel so much. It's Germany. The reason why the other European countries do not follow the building pressure in their publics to dissociate themselves from the Israeli genocide or almost genocide, call it massacre, in Gaza, has to do with Germany being very, very tough on the others, insisting that all they do is deliver once in a while a hot meal to the Gazans before they are being bombed again. Yeah. So then one has to put it like that. And in fact, I think, not having checked the figures, but I hear from very reliable sources that there's only 2 countries in the world that actually deliver arms to Israel. That is the United States, 2/3, and the Germans, 1/3. Yeah. So it would be difficult, as a result of the heterogeneity of the European Union in its present condition with 27 states, to have a consolidated common policy with respect to Gaza. But the Germans have that policy, and that's enough for the thing to take its terrible course. There was something else I wanted to say. Yeah, see, as I said at the outset, this structure, European Union, is sort of multifunctional. It doesn't function in any respect very well, but you can always come and use it for some other purposes. And Ukraine is a case where, for a number of reasons, the return of the king in the shape of Biden and the United States resulted in an attempt to turn that almost empty shell, the European Union, into an auxiliary device for NATO. Yeah, the NATO then there's basically two functions that the European Union adopted when the war began. One was to absorb the refugees from Ukraine, many of them young men who didn't want to take part in this massacre, didn't want to be massacred, in fact. And there Germany, I think, took in 1 million people at enormous expense, because the German government paid them the basic social assistance that you would get as a German long-term unemployed. In addition, I think there was this long-term idea on the part of the United States that Europe would at one stage have to be able to fight Russia on its own without direct American involvement. The Americans like to leave a place where things don't go the way they want. So Afghanistan was a glaring example. Nobody talks about this anymore. Yeah, but Syria is the same. Iraq is the same. Libya is the same. They sort of intervene for a short time, and then they leave a mess, and then they go. And the neighbors have to clean up the mess. And I think there was very early the idea that once the Americans leave and the war lasts, then the European Union, as the European leg of NATO, and then under the leadership of Germany, would have to step in. Yeah. Let me add two more functions that come to mind in this respect. One is the inclusion of new members in the European Union. Now the pressure is very, very hard, also from, interestingly, the German government, to take in the West Balkans, even Georgia, even a country like Serbia, which sort of moves from pro-Russian to pro-American, and you don't know where they are, to all include them into the European Union in order, I think, to feed them and re-educate them and turn them into good, reliable members of the West, of the western side of the Russian border, where apparently the idea is that the Eurasian continent will have to be cut in two halves or cut not exactly in two halves by the western border of Russia, and everything to the west of Russia being organized in NATO and in the European Union, and the European Union then would be something like a reception room for these countries. They would have to be fed, and then they would have to be taught what it means to be a liberal democracy. Sometimes they just pretend that they do what they hear, and then they can join NATO. Yeah, and then another thing. Sorry, yeah, you have to watch your technology.
I'm sorry.
And another thing is, and very close, close after, very shortly after the end of after the beginning of the war, was the sanctions. Apparently, the United States and NATO, which is basically the same, were believing that the European Union had the know-how, the skills, the technical wherewithal to design a package of sanctions against Russia that would, in very short time, force Russia to give up and get out of Ukraine. Yeah. Now, as so often, as also in the COVID pandemic, the Brussels machinery sort of really absolutely misfired. Now it is Germany that is suffering from the from these sanctions, and Russia has seen in very impressive economic growth in the last in the last 2 years as a result of it building up its arms industry, probably with support of the Chinese, although they are denying that. So opening up for new members, closing, so to speak, the Western Front, the Eastern Front of the West, defeating Russia by economic means. My impression is, from listening to people and reading things, that when the Istanbul talks, after the war had started, when they broke down, it was basically the promise of the Americans and the British to the Ukrainian side that that they had devised economic sanctions against Russia that would end the war within the same year. The boys will be home by Christmas. Yeah? And as so often, Hitler thought that in 1949 when he or 1940 when he attacked Russia. My father told me that they were told that they didn't need warm underwear when they went into Russia, because they would be home by the time the snow would start falling. Yeah, and then they all froze. Froze to death. Not all of them, but many of them. Yeah. So I think the promise was that the European Union, being sort of expert system on economics, would develop this. And remember, when you think back in the spring of 2022, there was this thing about excluding them from the SWIFT system. There was this thing about ending their oil exports and all of this. And everybody was absolutely clear that this would kill them. Yeah. So again, the European Union blundered, and this Brussels organization was unable to fulfill its promises, which for someone who has observed them for 20 or 30 years, beginning or longer, beginning with the social dimension, I know that this is typical. This is it. Promises that are not fulfilled.
Jeffrey Sachs, in an interview recently, said what amazes him is the fact that in Europe, there are no competent leaders anymore.
Yeah.
He was looking back at Helmut Kohl and Merkel and said, yeah, at least they sort of were leaders. But he said, there's absolutely nothing now within the EU, or Europe, I should say. Britons know better, as you well know. How did this happen? You're a sociologist, you should know.
With your succession of 4 or so British prime ministers within 3 weeks or something, yeah, you have to include Britain absolutely into this. No, I think that is a complicated question. First of all, I would like to say that you overestimate, or he overestimates Angela Merkel. Angela Merkel was not that sort of a leader. She was very smart, and she did things sort of behind the curtain, which were sometimes reasonable and sometimes not. But what she never was a person who would go out and explain to the country, the world, why some sort of hard decisions had to be taken. Yeah. So I give you an example. Going back to what I said at the beginning on German foreign policy, Merkel knew that the American attempt to get hold of Ukraine in order to station American missiles there and interrupt the flow of energy to Western Europe, that this was a recipe for disaster. She never said so in public. What she did was, at the 2008 meeting in Bucharest of NATO, together with Sarkozy, she sabotaged the attempt of George Bush in his last year, the second Bush, in his last year, to get a decision that Ukraine would be admitted to NATO without any previous demands or conditions. Yeah. Then the two of them together acted like Schröder and Chirac had acted when they refused to go into Iraq. Yeah, and I mentioned this because these were two cases in which the French-German relationship sort of did something for a sort of distancing of Europe from American presidents who had gone bonkers. Yeah. Now, the typical Merkel, now that the war is on, then comes the next step. Merkel and Hollande, trying to nail down the Minsk agreements, which they negotiated without the Americans, with the Ukrainians, the Russians, and the Belarus. 5 parties negotiated in Minsk. When the war began, Merkel, for a while, said nothing, and then she said, I was so baffled. Then she said, the only reason why we negotiated Minsk was in order to fool Putin and to get some sort of to buy time for Ukraine to be properly armed so that they could sort of fight the Russians. That she said, yeah, in public. The result is an absolute disaster. If you were Putin, which you're not, and I'm not Putin, but we're people with some sort of common sense. If my counterpart in a negotiation like this tells me that these negotiations were not serious, will I negotiate with them again? That will take some pressure and a lot of conditions and promises before I would do that. Yeah.
Well, Putin said in his interview with. Putin said in his interview with Tucker Carlson that he resents it and he has no trust anymore. So it confirms what you were saying.
Klar. And now the sociologist, as a sociologist, I would say trust is something that needs to be cultivated. It dissipates if it is not reinforced. That is so on the micro level. It is so on the macro level. The trust needs to be renewed and actively renewed. If you tell someone, I fooled you, I made you trust me, but I was so smart that I didn't mean it, then that's probably the worst thing you can do in order to sustain. But by that time, for her, it was important to be seen by the German public, which at the time was absolutely war hungry, that she had been on the right side, yeah, fighting this monster, Putin, Verbrecher, criminal. You look at German newspapers, and there he is, yeah, the criminal. And in that respect, you must. how many people did the Israelis kill in Gaza? 35,000, it is now said. And where's the criminal? In the German mind, there's no criminal. It's a sort of normal thing that you do in order to defend yourself. Yeah, where's Guantanamo? Even Obama wasn't able to release these poor people who are going to die on that island. Many of them so probably innocent that they can't even stand trial, because otherwise you would have to release them. So in our language, yeah, it is impossible to be what they call in German Putin-Versteher, someone who understands Putin. Yeah. Now, as a sociologist, Max Weber called sociology die verstehende Wissenschaft, the science that understands the motivation of actors, and in that sense depends on a good interpretation of what an actor wants. For this, you have to listen and to put yourself in the shoes of the actor that you want to understand. So as a sociologist, if someone tells me someone is a Putin-Versteher, I say, yeah, what else? What else can you be? You have to understand your enemy. He may be our enemy in many ways, but even if he is an enemy, you have to understand what he's up to. But you were asking about the present leadership in Europe. Then you can have a lot of sort of explanations at the personal level. For example, in a neoliberal period, as it began in the 1980s and then very much into the 21st century, the more attractive jobs for the most intelligent people are in banking, in business, and so on, and is at least on the part of the bourgeois parties what is left in politics after the others have gone to make a pile of money in the international banking system, is very often not very smart, yeah, and not very dedicated to a cause. Look at this. Look at these several people. I think all women who were prime ministers of their countries, like in Finland and in New Zealand. After a while, they disappear, and then they come back as associates in Tony Blair's international consulting firm. Yeah, where they are being paid, where they sell their so-called know-how for unbelievable sums, which seems to be much more pleasant than having to run a country. So, and then on the part of the socialist parties, that, as you know, as we all know, is that with their turn to the neoliberal idea of adjustment of workers to the economy rather than adjustment of the economy to the needs of workers and their families, then, and at this time it was not very attractive to be a labor leader. Yeah, but there were no visions anymore, which you can see. So yes, but then moving beyond the level of personal psychology or personal characteristics, I think if you look at our states today, after we have turned over our political economies to the international economy and in basically to the international financial system, there is not much to be done anymore at the national level. Politics has been sort of, how do you say, evacuated by causes. There is no, what can you do? And in the European Union, they are using the European Union as an excuse. They say, yeah, unfortunately, we're in the European Union, and therefore this and this and this we cannot do. Yeah, so this vacuum of political maneuver and maneuverability is something that people do not cherish as a life occupation. Yeah.
Good. Before we go over to the politics of the EU, I just wanted to get back to one point. Listening to you, I almost have the impression what you're saying is, in the meantime, Europe has a hierarchy. The US is at the top, and then comes Germany, and Germany sort of administrates Europe.
Yeah.
For example, in the war in Ukraine,
Yeah.
we also know with regard to finance and economy, the Germans dictate what's being done. That sort of contradicts everything about the EU.
Yeah, what you describe is somehow similar to what the reality is, but essentially it is the idea that the United States have about Europe. The idea is that their most important ally in Europe becomes something like a sub-commander on the European battlefield. And as I said at the beginning, with 40,000 American troops stationed on German soil, and Germany being the most important switchboard for American operations in the Middle East, the number of planes that came in during the war on terror to land in Ramstein in the Palatinate was unbelievable. They also have the central command for mid-eastern or near eastern operations of the United States forces. If you take this into account, then it is almost a natural idea for the United States to think that a country that is so much so dependent on our military protection, should be also a country that does what we want to be done in Europe as a whole. The extent to which the European Union is an instrument in this respect, that's a very complicated question. Sometimes it's NATO, sometimes it's the European Union. My impression is that in this sort of mess of historical institutional legacies which is the European Union, now the military, national security, American global interests sort of are beginning to creep into this thing in a very fundamental way. At the same time, what you now see, and that is really important, is that in quite a few European countries, look at the upcoming European election, there are now sort of right-wing movements that in one way or other are trying to rediscover the fact that their countries have interests that are not necessarily identical with the interests of either the United States or Germany. Yeah, and we don't know how strong they will be in the next European Parliament. Mind you that the Parliament is not really a parliament. It doesn't elect a government. It cannot de-elect a government, but it can be a sort of something like an unpleasant neighbor, so to speak, for the bureaucracy. And as these nationalist movements begin to grow, they have to answer to a problem, which is that if they are nationalists, how can they be at the same time internationalists? Internationalists in the sense that they have to work together in order to form a common bloc in the European Parliament. But as I said, in the interwar years and during the Second World War, on the right side of the political spectrum in many countries were political movements that were pro-German. Yeah. So it is possible to develop a pan-European nationalism based on nationalisms. I don't think that this can ever be a majority in Europe, but it can be a difficult problem for the bureaucracy as it now exists.
It's an important question, which we won't cover tonight, unfortunately. But yeah, the next point is, you mentioned the right, far right, populist parties, whatever you wish to call them. About 4 years ago, all of them were saying, if we are elected, we are going to leave the EU. Suddenly, they're all piling in, trying to get into the EU Parliament. Can you explain what happened, please?
What they learn is that there is action in Brussels in which they must take an interest. Then on the more frugal side, you can also say that being a member of the European Parliament is not a poorly paid job, and you also have a lot of can hire a lot of people as your staff. This is a huge place, and very well funded. So at some stage, as these parties consolidate, they also discover the European elections as an opportunity to make themselves known in their country. But of course, the slogans are very different. For example, in Italy now, the slogan of the Fratelli is for a strong Italy in Europe. That is the in many ways sort of the more primitive idea of all these parties. They present themselves as a party that cares for their own country in the context of the European Union and wants to strengthen their position in that context. Then you have a different layer on top of this. And this is something like, we don't want a European Union. It's not just about national strength now. Now it's about the function of the European Union. We don't want a European Union that imposes a sort of liberal green agenda on our countries, and we do not like that agenda. And then they discover, let's say, the Poles and the Fratelli, that they have something in common. Now they have to work this out. There's lots of animosity between them. Will the German AfD, which will get about 15% of the vote, I think, be willing and able to work with Marine Le Pen's delegates in the European Parliament? Marine Le Pen wants nothing to do with the AfD. The AfD would very much like to be welcomed by Marine Le Pen. And you see, this adds a new layer on European politics, which is very interesting to watch. Without, I can't really say where this will lead to. But yes, these parties are now taking an interest in this structure, in part in order to strengthen the position of their country and then sell themselves at home as people who are not selling out the national interests in Brussels, but they are representing them. And then, as I said, layer on top of this to fight the liberalism, or whatever they call it, in a populist way. And they can do this together with others. For example, the European Union and the state of law thing, driven by the European Court, where the Union refuses to pay out of its structural funds a country like Poland or Hungary, unless they change their family law or whatever. And extensive reading of the treaties seems to make this possible. in the next parliament, there may be a sizable group that resents these things. Yeah. Now, I personally think that law on social matters, as they are called, like childcare, homosexuality, all of these things, has to grow inside a country. When I grew up in the late 1960s, yeah, homosexuality was a crime. People could go to prison in Germany. Now it's 60 years hence. They have all these parades with everything, pride and stuff. But it took 60 years. But then it developed inside that country. I think similar developments may take in other European countries, like in Hungary also. But you cannot impose it from the outside. Yes, and then if Orban doesn't do what you tell him, he goes to his voters and says, "Look, I defended your values," and that makes it possible for him, like last time, to win the next election even more than the preceding election. Yeah.
So what we can say is, despite all the claims, there is no single vision for the EU.
No. Each country, or not each country, but blocks of countries have their own visions of the European Union, and that is what it remains. Now, I think that it would be good for Europe if everybody would understand that these visions are different and they cannot be overruled or extirpated from the center. That would mean you would have more, in a sense, I call this more voluntary cooperation rather than hierarchically imposed cooperation. And in that sense, coming from the left, but knowing the value of sovereignty of a state that wants to be democratic. Yeah, you cannot be a democracy without sovereignty, because otherwise you make all sorts of decisions and someone else then makes a different decision, and that is what it is. No, so if you think that democracy can develop only if political communities cannot be overruled from a common center, then in that case the way for the European Union to go, if it wants to survive in this image, is to become less hierarchical and more horizontal. That is a place where lots of know-how is accumulated in the center that countries could use for voluntary cooperation between them. Call it Europe of varying geometry. It used to be called for a while, or even de Gaulle called it Europe de Patrie, Europe of the fatherland. I think you can also say motherland, but if it is feministically better. But something like this could save this structure. Give you an example. One of the most successful international organizations in history was and still is the Northern Council of the four Scandinavian countries. Long before the European Union, they had no borders between them. Each of them had their own politics different, policy different, but they were cooperating in a great number of things where they thought cooperation was good for everyone. Sometimes only for three of them, because the fourth didn't want to. So this sort of international organization, a community or a cooperative, you could say a cooperative rather than a firm, could be something. And there I really want to say that this sort of thing might be able or might be achieved by a consensus between a democratically oriented left and a sovereignty-oriented right or semi-right. Yeah. Why not? You asked about Sarah Wagenknecht. I can say that there is a clear understanding that you cannot, in a democracy, sort of refuse to listen to a group of people who may command the loyalty of 15% of your voters. You have to listen to them and understand them, and then see what you can do in order to get them to come to you rather than go to the trumpets.
You wrote once that what Europe needs, following your train of thought right now, is a civil disobedience by the EU nations.
Yeah.
In other words, saying we want to take back our autonomy, or at least a great part of it, reduce the power of the Council and the European Court of Justice, but also the Brussels bureaucracy, which is a bureaucracy, which is a topic for itself. Can you explain a bit more what you meant by civil disobedience by nations?
No. I mean, it's already underway. The problem is that this sort of healthy development, I give you examples in a second, that this development is being publicly how do you say publicly held to be a problem, where in fact it is something like a solution, namely to the increasing tensions inside the European Union. And now take an example. Give an example. The French, who historically ran their economy very successfully with a strong state, with a large public deficit, that they later sort of caught up with through increased productivity as a result of sort of state projects like the TGV or other things. Now in the European Union, they are not allowed to have more than 60% of their gross domestic product in debt. Yeah. In fact, they now have roughly, I think, 120%. When this Jean-Claude Juncker was asked, the former president of the European Union, the precursor of von der Leyen, when a reporter asked him, how come that the French, at the time they were at about 70 or 80%, how come that they can have the debt like this? Juncker looked at him and said, it's because the French are the French. Yeah. That was ridiculed. But in my view, it was a wise answer, because the French economy requires a strong state that invests heavily in public goods in order to lift the productivity of the French economy. In Germany, that is quite different. We are sort of export obsessed, and therefore we cannot have, we need a very sort of stable, external exchange relationship, which is sort of improved by not having a public deficit. Therefore, we are sort of austerity obsessed in order to make it possible for our export industry to be successful. The Italians have still another, or had still another growth model, which was by inflation, driven by domestic demand and strong trade unions. They needed at the end to be able to lower their exchange rate in order to compensate for the increased inflation, something the French would never want to do. If you see that these sort of styles of managing a capitalist economy and managing some sort of class compromise inside these economies, if you see that these are so deeply ingrained in the institutions and the traditions of a society or of a state, then you have to, in my view, then you have to have institutions that allow them to pursue the economic prosperity to the extent that it is still possible in their own way. Yeah, in a way that is possible for them, given their tradition, their political institutions, and so on. That requires that this sort of idea that every economy in the European Union can function according to the same model, which is the German model. That is a completely stupid idea. It results in tensions inside the European Union, and in an increasing number of people in these countries to consider the European Union either as a case where they would rather get out, or as a case where they would rather want to stay in order to pull out as much as they can, sort of make the Germans pay for the dream that everybody is German. Yeah, that in the long run, this is not a good idea. It leads to enormous international tensions and to dysfunctions in this whole regime. Take the euro, take the way in which the European Monetary Union has to, under the table, the European Central Bank, under the table to finance the Italian state in going around through the Italian banking system, because the Germans allow for this. Nobody in Germany sort of can actually understand how it works, and the German government tolerates it because they want the Italians to remain in the European Union for all sorts of reasons, and to sort of publicly confess that they are Germans when they are not. Yeah. So yes, these things are underway. They are happening. They are perceived as a catastrophe. The Hungarians do not introduce sex education from age 8 or something, and then the Greens in the European Parliament get panicky about it. I would think, forget it. Try to form a community of states that have common interests and have the facilities to pursue these common interests in common without them being dictated to them from above.
Yes, but you know what, or you remember what the late Wolfgang Schäuble said to Varoufakis: elections cannot be allowed to change economic policy, which sort of the German position.
Wait. That is absolutely true. That's what he said. But the answer is not to tell the stupid Germans that they should not do this. The answer is to change the institutions in such a way that the Germans can never hope, that there can never be a moment in which a country votes in a certain way and then it can get corrected, so to speak, by the majority of the rest of the country. Yeah, that, however, means that you have to sort of loosen the ties between them. There must be what Schäuble says to Varoufakis is, We cannot, only because one country has now changed its mind and its government, we cannot change the European policy of the European Union. That's completely true. The whole European Union was not invented to depend on elections. Yeah. When however, the system now works in such a way that the freely expressed will of one of the member states sort of cannot be realized because the system has the power to prevent them from doing so, then I would say there's something wrong with the institutions. They should be such that Herr Schäuble would no longer, he's dead now, that Herr Schäuble would no longer have to worry about the next Greek election. Yeah.
All right, but on the other hand, we've seen so often, in large policies, small policies, that a lot of these nations, not only France, do what they want. For example, here Schengen during COVID was it was binned by many nations. You've seen it in Poland, you've seen it in Hungary. For example, the case of the Ukrainian border with Poland and with Slovakia, where the farmers simply block the border because they see unfair competition and the government just tolerates it. So I think there's a lot more of this going on. We just aren't told about it.
What's your answer to this? Do you want to send European police to Poland to break up the blockade? No, it's something that these countries have to work out between them. That's nothing. Of course, in a sense, European Union has sort of control over agricultural policy. They bring in the produce from Ukraine. But why? They make it obligatory for Poland to accept these imports. No, Poland should have the capacity to decide. Then they have to make up a complicated decision, but the Poles are as smart as we are, no problem. They can do this. They can say, do I want to, in the first place, support the Ukrainian government and pay for it with subsidies to my own farmers? Or is it more important for me that my own farmers are happy and then I close the border and tell the Ukrainians that they have to find some other way? Nothing other happened, in fact. Yeah. Then you can go to some other country like Germany and say, look, you want this stuff in the German market, then let's make a deal how we seal the trucks so that they cannot offload their produce in Poland, and then we let them pass through. There's lots of way in which for example, Europe existed with this thing called the OECD, the European thing for cooperation and development in the final decades of the Cold War, including the Soviet Union and its bloc. These countries, these international organizations, do not have a commanding center; they have an organizing center. Diplomats that advise in sort of working out differences between countries. The moment we begin to think that there should in Europe be a central agency that corrects the attitudes and misdeeds of sovereign democratic countries, we have a big problem. And the problem is getting bigger. And we see it before our eyes.
So to conclude, where do you think this is all going? I think where you began is correct, that the European Union is not an ever closer union. Actually, it's sort of going in the opposite direction. It's discovering that closer union is not always, what should I say, advantageous.
Yeah.
But you're going to have certain nations like Germany with that on the moral high horse, always telling everyone else how they have to behave, how they have to think. The Italian method might be to say yes, yes, but on the other hand, do exactly the opposite. I don't know what's coming. What do you think is? We have Eastern European nations who are really sort of going their own way. It's amazing. I find.
Yeah, why not? If they are democratic sovereign nations, they can go their own way. And what you are now saying is this thing that where you have countries that are sovereign, you immediately have war because they cannot cooperate. But that is not the case. You can, for example, take the Scandinavian countries, which for hundreds of years have sort of peacefully coexisted with each other, being very different. The Finns are very different ethnically, linguistically, historically from the Swedes. The Danes have very bad feelings about the Swedes and vice versa. And the Norwegians are somewhere. And they worked with each other. At some point, 200 years ago, the last, I think the king of such and such gave Norway sovereignty, and now they work. Something like this. My point is this. There's no guarantee at all. We may be on the brink of a disaster. Yeah. Thinking that the disaster can be prevented or avoided by institutionalizing in Europe a strong central supranational government that tells these states how to behave. That is maybe that would be a good idea if we were the ones who tell them what to do. Yeah, but we can say that this is not going to happen. Simply, it is not going to happen. This would be an empire, and an empire needs to be kept together, either by economic payoffs, there's not enough for this, or by military violence. These are the two means by which you get an empire together, and then you put on top some ideology. There is no such center in Europe that could organize this kind of, let's say, multinational or supranational government. I mentioned at the beginning the idea that France and Germany could do this together was a sort of auxiliary idea because they knew the Germans after the Second World War, nobody will want them. The French are too small. Why not put the two together? And then we have a center for a European empire, a good empire for a change, not an evil empire. Yeah, but that is totally, this is a dream world. Then the question becomes, what is possible for Europe? Europe, the way in which it has grown. And there I would say, what is possible is to try to blend into, in the coming world, to blend into this sort of block, let's say blockfrei, into a world where there are an increasing number of countries, small and big, who do not belong to the American bloc, nor do they belong to the Chinese bloc. Where what used to be called the Third World, namely between America and the Soviet Union, led by India, at the time Yugoslavia, and all of this, where this can become an option for countries who do no longer want to be governed by the United States and who have no taste to become to become dominions of China. Russia is out. Yeah. And then the question becomes: can we think about a world that is no longer unipolar, like after 1990, America rules the world. No longer bipolar like before 1990, with a sprinkling of third world neutral countries, yeah, not tripolar, where we in Germany would, in Europe, would have the arrogant idea that we can form an ever closer union of the European peoples, turning them into one people, and then acting as a rival to both the United States and China. Yeah, that is sort of the French dream. And there I would say it is totally unrealistic. Yeah, and then let us, you, we, others, think about a fourth alternative. Yeah, a continent where we organize some sort of a cooperative game between sovereign states, a world in which Russia would again be able to be included. Because the Eurasian continent, if it is divided at the western border of Russia, it will be subject to an arms race, stimulated also by the United States. And if there is in Asia a conflict between the United States and China, then that will also sort of extend itself to Europe. Let us try to develop something that is in line with our history. Our history is one of diversity, not of unity, and of sometimes productive diversity, and of a capacity to talk to each other. And I know that the British are very skeptical about this, because they would like to be the sort of the second in command of the Americans, and the Germans being the third in command, so that the British will also tell the Germans what to do. But the utopia has to be sort of something that is neither, as I said, unipolar nor bipolar, no tripolar, but something else. Tripolar is not possible. Bipolar is potentially deadly, and unipolar is what the Americans are fighting for, but they will not get it.
Wolfgang, thank you very, very much. And I think this is a good point to stop for tonight.
Yes.
I just want to remind listeners that, once again, on the 6th of May at 6 p.m. CET, we have Kostas Lapavitsas. And then on the 16th at 7 p.m. CET, we have Tara McCormick, and hope that you will join us. I'm supposed to tell you, if you're doing this, watching this on YouTube, you're supposed to click like and click follow. Apparently, it has no real consequences besides feeding the deep state, but otherwise it's rather harmless, and it helps us in some manner, which I've never really understood. Wolfgang, once again, thank you very much for taking your time, and get back to you after the elections on the 9th. I'm ready to see what happens.
Thanks for having me, and I wish your series and your Brave New Europe outlet all the best. You are absolutely essential for the progressive debate in Europe.
Thank you very much.
We're out.
Brilliant. Good God.
you.